Hello and welcome to today's Dark Reading webinar, Identity Maturity Under Pressure, 2026 Findings and How to Catch Up, sponsored by Cerby and broadcast by Informa Tech Target. I'm Terry Sweeney with Dark Reading. I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. By way of context, in this session, we'll be looking at data recently collected from more than 600 IT and security leaders that assesses the scale and impact of disconnected applications. Our speakers will help us understand why mature identity programs are still driving audit friction and stalled initiatives. They'll discuss the risks of manual password and credential management, and they'll also talk about how AI agents are expanding identity risk and practical steps organizations can use to regain control. On that note, I'm excited to introduce our speakers, joined today by Matt Chiodi, Chief Strategy Officer with Cerby. He's joined by Mike Fitzpatrick, founder and CEO of NCX Group. Gentlemen, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thanks, Terry.
For having us.
Fun.
Matt, before I hand it over to you, I just want to remind our audience of a couple of things. If you've been here before, you know this webinar is designed to be interactive between you and the speakers. At the bottom of the screen, there's some buttons that will allow you to download a copy of the slides, share this webinar on social media, and learn more about today's speakers. This is also where you'll participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of the presentation. You can use that Q&A area to let us know if you're experiencing any technical issues, and our team will do their best to assist you. I think that's it from me. Let's get to it. Matt, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Terry. Mike, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you, Matt. It's been a little while, but it's good to be back and hanging out with you.
I love it. I love it. So let's jump right into it. So 77% of organizations experienced at least one cybersecurity incident in the past 2 years caused specifically by their inability to secure apps not connected to their identity stack. I'll say it again. 77% of organizations experienced at least one cybersecurity incident in the past 2 years caused specifically by their inability to secure apps not connected to their identity stack. So this is what Mike and I are going to talk about over the next 30, 40 minutes. And again, as Terry said, if you have questions as we go through, please drop them into the chat. We will try to answer those in real time as we go through it. So please ask those questions. So Matt Chiodi, I am the CSO at Cerby, former Chief Security Officer at Palo Alto Networks. I've been doing this cybersecurity thing for over 20 years. Mike, who's joining me, has been a Ponemon Distinguished Fellow for over 18 years, and he helped design some of this research. Mike, tell us about yourself.
Well, Matt, I'm CEO, founder of NCX Group. We're a cyber risk advisory firm, and we've been doing this now for about 25 years. Thousands of assessments later, it's still amazing to me some of the things we walk into every time we go out on a project. So this research from an identity management standpoint is fantastic. It's a lot of really informative and granular information with a problem area that we see literally in every project we do.
And so this research, it really quantifies, I think, something that practitioners have known for years, but maybe didn't have the numbers for. So why don't we jump into it? Tell us a little about it.
Well, so the research project is one of the things I love about what we do at Ponemon and at the Institute is the research projects are always very thorough. 614 IT and security leaders. It's an independent research project, but the important thing is it's cross-industry. So it's not one specific industry. I mean, this particular one was retail, financial services, manufacturing, tech, health, energy. 80% of it was 80% of it was supervisory and above. So in this, we measured 5 things. We measured identity coverage, security incidents, compliance, operational burden, and that all too famous AI wildcard these days.
I love that. I love it. So this is very wide ranging. And for those of you who are watching this live right now, this research is very fresh. This just came out literally, I think, in the last month. So very good. And again, this is the first study to put hard numbers on disconnected apps specifically. So if you want to get a full copy of the report, Mike and I, we're just going to touch on probably only 20% of what's in the actual report. We'll try to touch on the things that I think we found to be most interesting. But if you scan this code, you can take the link and download that. I'll show this again later in the presentation. So let's jump into just some of the numbers, right? So I wanted to start with this one, Mike, because I think this will set the tone for the rest of the conversation. And here, the question behind this was, we asked respondents to rate their confidence in their identity program's ability to provide consistent security controls across all their apps, connected and disconnected. And as you can see here, 6 out of 10 was the average confidence score that their identity controls covered all apps. That's not a lot of confidence. This means like their Okta, their Entra, their SailPoint, right? They have these tools, but they only cover what they can see. So there's a lot that's invisible. So best way, and there's a reason for this visual, right? Like there's the blue circle. These are your connected or your federated apps. That's where your IAM and all your controls live. But those little dots that you see all around it, those are the gaps we're talking about.
Well, and I got to say, the confidence factor, it seems to me to be more hopeful than anything else. The other thing that strikes me, Matt, and it's a little fun here, is remember the movie Meet the Fockers, Circle of Trust? It kind of the visual strikes me as you've got those inside the circle of trust and those outside the circle of trust. The 6 out of 10, I see that more as a hopeful strategy rather than what we typically see when we go in and we're doing a project. And when you see what the reality actually is, it's a very different world once you get into really digging into it from an assessment standpoint to determine what's working, what's not working, what's inside the circle of trust and what's outside the circle of trust.
I think you're right. A lot of times when, in my previous roles as a CISO, the score, if we would have been talking to, an advisory committee, a leadership team, a lot of times, if you would have asked me in the past around this, I probably would have given our program a similar rating. I'd have been, it's like, there's some gaps and whatnot. But I think that, there would have been gaps around these disconnected apps, right? Because I think for many organizations, and we're actually in a minute here, we'll put a fine definition on what we mean by a disconnected app. But a lot of times these apps, the management, the governance, the auditability, it's kind of built into business as usual, right? People are just kind of used to doing the manual management for a lot of these. It doesn't show up as like a big headline item. So this is a lot of times it's just a built-in assumption, and it's a part that I think most CISOs don't even bake in when they think about their kind of their overall IAM security posture.
Well, I think you're right about that. I think the other part of it that comes into play too is the walls that exist between IT and security from that standpoint, and how you actually how you go about dividing and conquering who should really have ownership of this across the board, I think is also a question from an organizational standpoint.
I love that. Again, if you have questions as we kind of go through this, please feel free to ask those, and we'll do our best to answer those in real time as we go through. So let's keep going here. So let's look at the reality, right? So this was more of the first question was more of like, what do you think? Here we asked them to really quantify what their application portfolio looks like. So here's what it looks like. And again, these are averages. And I think these are right. I have hundreds of these conversations with CISOs, IAM leaders. And what they said was that on average, they've got right around 300 applications that are in their portfolio, right? So this is SaaS, this is on-prem, this is third-party apps, things like that, right? They're saying they have about 300. I think this might actually skew a little bit low I know from speaking with, some large financial services companies, like they have got thousands of apps that are in their portfolio. But let's just say for the purposes of this, right, like 300, it's about right. And if we build this out a little bit more and we ask specifically, okay, now tell me about these apps in here. Well, we know that they said that about 88 of these apps, they are not centrally managed with any type of MFA, meaning they can't set a policy at the IDP layer and enforce MFA on these apps. So that's 88. 70 of these apps have no single sign-on. That means it's manual credentials, they're using a password manager, something like that. And this last batch, this 60, this is what I call that the absolute perimeter of risk. This is pure manual administration.
Now, those 60 apps with the manual administration, that creates like massive exposure at the end of the day. That's always at the top of the list for us. And we see a lot of it, quite frankly, with roles and permissions within cloud environments is really where it has run amok. You have a lot of maybe former consultants that have been brought in that were given access and privilege that are no longer part of it, or team members that were no longer part of it. So these applications, these orphan type of accounts that are out there become a real problem. But those 60 applications that are not covered, that definitely becomes a problem area.
Now, Mike, I know that, in the work you've done over the last 20 plus years, you've done a lot with M&A. Like, what happens in a transaction when an acquirer finds out that there's nearly, almost 100 of these apps that are sitting outside of identity governance? What's that look like?
Well, what that ends up becoming once they figure it out, and that's also the dynamic that's also interesting too. But once they find out, it definitely becomes a delay in the acquisition, in the transaction, which all sides hate. The M&A guys, the PE guys, they all hate. Everything is built about speed, and we're also getting to the point too where in the past, companies and parties in this transactions have been utilizing insurance to insure the problem away. Those days are coming to an end quickly too. The insurance companies have had their time being the responsible party in the room, and they're just not going to waste the cash anymore. So they're demanding that the businesses step up and take a more proactive approach. And if you don't, they're not going to insure you. So we're finally hitting something that I've preached about for about 18, 19 years now. This should be part of every policy renewal going on, is a cyber risk assessment within the organization.
Appreciate that. Well, let's put a fine definition on, we've been kind of talking about a connected, disconnected, federated, non-federated. Let's put a definition on what do we mean by a disconnected app. Now, one of the challenges in our industry is we have a lot of different terms for the same thing. And for this category of problem that we're talking about, a business app that's not integrated into an organization's identity stack due to a lack of support for standards, like if you ask Gartner, like they call this a non-standard app. If you talk to an identity provider like Okta, they call these non-federated apps. But the industry is pretty close with using the term disconnected app. So what I want to be really clear about when we talk about this, because this is really where all the research is centered around in this report, is we're not talking about shadow IT. Some people think, oh, this is all shadow IT. No, like the research shows that certainly shadow IT could be a part of this, but is not the majority of it. We're talking here again about business apps that are not integrated with your org's IDP because they don't support the standards, not the IDP, but the app itself. These are legitimate tools. These are HR systems, finance platforms, marketing SaaS tools. It could be something as seemingly as benign as your organization's enterprise social media credentials, right? Those are all fall into the category of a disconnected app. So just so we're all clear kind of on the definition of what we're talking about, This is what we mean by a disconnected app. All right, let's look at this, Mike, from two different perspectives. I think this will really drive home the point, right? So let's familiarize the audience with this. Left-hand side of the screen, this is really the area that your identity and access management platform was built for. And this is typically when you do your slides and your stats, this is what you're talking about. This is the SAML, the OIDC, the centralized credentials, the automated skim, the one-click audit. The right side, of course, this is the disconnected reality. This is the 55% of the research we found that say that 55% of their apps, disconnected apps, use password-only authentication. 47% said that, guess what? IT doesn't manage the credentials. It's end user managed. And by the way, 39% of those are shared credentials. Now, the truth is, and I'm sure, Mike, you've seen this in some of the due diligence work that you've done and many of the audit work you've done, right? I have not found a single org that I have worked with over the last 4+ years that doesn't live simultaneously in both of these columns, right? It's most of the governance and the due diligence is done on the connected side, and that disconnected side on the right, this is where the manual work, that's that as Mike used the analogy, right, outside that circle of trust, that's where that happens.
No, I agree with you. Both the organizations that we work with definitely live in both columns. I think the really troubling part is that leadership only usually sees one of them, and that's the big, especially with a lot of several of the measures and ways that assessments and this we seem to be developing a focus solely on technology elements as far as the risk is concerned. And you and I have been around and have done this long enough that we know that it's people, process, and technology. And a lot of what used to be caught, companies are not including in the scopes from an assessment perspective. And I think a lot of things are going to end up falling through the crack. These disconnected apps, as we're talking about, are going to be at the top of that list. So they need to have a way to really gain control of those. There's a couple of companies that we have worked with in the past that come to mind that are nothing but disconnected apps. And, so from that standpoint, giving them a way to actually gain control over something that would live outside the normal controls and normal apps for identity management is a big thing. So I think Cerby is in a fantastic place to be able to solve this particular problem.
Let's look at this from, one of the things I appreciated about the research is it really didn't just kind of talk about the problem, but it really dug into how organizations are attempting to address it today. So, let's talk about the scenario of a termination signal, right? So someone leaves the organization, maybe you're an FTE, maybe it's a contractor. I'd love to hear from the audience in the chat here. Like, is this, let's do an informal poll, just drop it into the Q&A, right? But, how many of you fall into the scenario that we're pointing in here, right? So if someone leaves the organization, maybe it's a unregrettable termination, we'll call it that. It's a nice way we call that. The HR termination signal comes in. What happens next? Again, in the case of disconnected apps, we know that from the data that 51% said that it goes to a manual ticket, right? To a ServiceNow, some type of service desk. So termination signal comes in, whether that's an automated feed from an HR system or whether HR literally opens up a ServiceNow ticket. The point is that a human is involved. Okay, that's what's happening 51% of the time with these disconnected apps. The next part of it is organizations have attempted to do some automation around this. The challenge is that they're usually trying to do it in a way with scripting. Maybe they're trying to use RPA, something like a UiPath, Blue Prism, but it's very fragile. So 48% have attempted to do this in some automated fashion, but it's very brittle. The last group here completely is relying on humans right? And so this is what we call that. This is that swivel chair work where, HR sends in the signal, however they're doing that. Maybe they manually go in, maybe they send an email, an extremely manual scenario, or maybe they're a little better. They open a ServiceNow ticket. And then whenever that IT admin gets around to doing it, 1 day, 5 days, never 30 days, they have to manually log in. So 2 screens, right? I've got the ticket on this screen, and the other screen, I've got to log in to that app. Maybe as IT, I don't even have access. So maybe I have to reach out to the business app owner, wait for them. And it's this very manual process where at the end, we're like, hey, maybe it was revoked. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe we're still paying a SaaS license cost because we weren't able to reclaim it. And I stamp all this as an IT tax, right? I mean, 31 hours per week on average, maintaining and fixing these workarounds every single week. I call it an IT tax because I just got off a call right before this where oftentimes this tax, it never actually hits a budget line. And oftentimes that's why this kind of continues to exist in many organizations.
Well, it's definitely one of those things that never makes a report from a cost, a dollars and cents standpoint or a budget standpoint. Did an article probably 6 months ago on, are you spending the right amount of money to cover a possible breach within your organization? Quite frankly, most, Matt, just are nowhere near the spend that they need to spend to actually survive a breach and the cost related to that breach. So they're not even meeting that threshold. So being able to identify what that cost is and put a number to it is definitely an important aspect of things. I think in general, putting a dollars and cents cost to everything within a cybersecurity assessment is critical today.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point there. And again, this is an average here, 31 hours a week, right? If you are a large scale multinational, 10,000 plus employees, this number is dramatically greater than 31 hours a week, right? I spoke to a Fortune 50 healthcare provider a couple months ago, and they told me that they have a team of 25 people that are doing this manual work every day, all day. So their number is much larger than that 31. So Mike, my question for you is like, when you're advising a CEO, CFO, like how do you make the cost of this visible so it actually gets resourced?
Well, in our reports and what we provide back to the board, we're actually, as I mentioned previously, we're actually now starting to identify costs that go to that IT tax that you're talking about. We're including some of that data and trying to put dollars and cents to it because of what I mentioned before. They're not spending where they should be spending. And that's been a consistent problem. Matt, how far does that problem go back? That problem with consistent spending and what they should be spending, I think it goes back to the creation of the term cybersecurity. But
it does.
I mean, it's a constant battle, and a lot of it comes from cybersecurity not having its own budget, but being a line item within IT. So I think it becomes really problematic. I think as the executive teams are starting to learn more and understand more and take a more proactive approach, a more business risk centered approach rather than treating it like all IT, I think that you're going to see that change. I think that being able to apply cost to those hours, the 31 hours times 50 employees that might be doing it, it's a crazy number. The other part that comes to mind too is like on third party risk. There's one of our clients, and he's got a team of 25 people just doing third-party risk. And you start looking at the hours that are manual within third-party risk in the data, as a recent Ponemon report, you've got 40 to 160 hours per assessment on that side of it. So, and again, that's another cost like this that isn't accounted for in those assessments, in the reports, in the findings that go to the boards.
Vikram asked a good question around like, how do you measure identity maturity? Vikram, that's a great question. We have a slide that we are going to cover this a little bit later. So just stay tuned. We will directly address that question. Let's, one of the questions I often get is, okay, like I understand, I kind of get the concept. I know about these disconnected apps. I have them in my environment. What would that look like in a breach scenario? So this is a high level of abstraction of the MITRE attack framework, but specifically applied with a disconnected app. So let's walk through it, right? So step one, I call this the weak gate. This is where an attacker gets into a disconnected app because it's got no MFA. The research shows 41% of the time, these apps do not have MFA. And guess what? The other 37% of the time, they have easily guessed credentials, right? So they're very susceptible to credential stuffing attacks, things like that, right? So that's the first one. So you get in, you find your initial point of entry. Then what do? Well, step two is you expand, right? You see, what else can I do? So in this case here, an attacker could pivot via either shared or insecure credentials 33% of the time. And then what do they try to do with that? They try to gain excessive privileges, right? Because the data shows that 54% of the time, these disconnected apps, the authentication and the roles and entitlements, 54% of the time, it is showing that they have excess privileges. And then the last step, right, is now what I'm going to do is I'm going to establish persistence, right? How do I do that? I create some ghost accounts, and the data shows 36% of the time, we know there are orphaned accounts on these disconnected apps. And there are also upwards of 49% of the time users who never got offboarded. So key point here, right, is every step is directly enabled by the disconnected app gap. There's no 0 days that are required in this scenario that we're talking about here. No 0 days, right? This is kind of a low-tech way that if we look at most breaches, they're not via 0 days. They're usually via identity, via factors just like this.
No, it's and I would say the figure there with 48% is right in line with what we're seeing in our own data within the assessments that we do. The other point that comes to mind with all this is, again, going back to the insurance side of it, is no insurance carrier is really going to look favorably at this kind of approach. I mean, this is going to be really problematic for them. We're now seeing, Matt, I did a presentation a month or so ago, and it was basically a canary in the coal mine, a trend that I'm seeing, and it's a term called subrogation. You familiar with subrogation?
Refresh my memory.
So subrogation is kind of like a tag team wrestling match. So in this particular case, the insurance company took care of one of their clients who was an experienced data breach through a ransomware event. They paid the $500,000 in claim, but then they tapped in and they became the offended party. And then they went to go recoup their $500,000. One of the participants that they went to recoup from was the MSP that didn't enforce the MFA program within the organization. The other was, I believe it was TrustWave, if I'm not mistaken, the outsourced security SOC that was providing the service. They didn't respond to the attack. So it's a situation of, an overscribed provider that never responded. But the insurance companies, this is the 12th case in 2 years, so where subrogation is starting to be used. So that ability to actually have the insurance company tag in and recoup their losses, it seems to be a strategy that is working. They haven't lost it on any of the cases.
Wow. So no cyber insurer is going to cover the, hey, we knew manual offboarding was unreliable, but we kept doing it. Sounds like that's no longer going to be a valid excuse.
Yeah, no, the days of trying to insure your way out of this, they're coming to a fast end.
Well, if you haven't taken the opportunity to download the report yet, just a quick reminder, you can download that here and get a full copy of the report. Well, let's keep going, right? So we often say in security that compliance is not security, and that's true. But as we know, we were just talking about it, it's still something that we have to do. And so there's some interesting data that came out in this research. We found that 46% said that they needed a major manual effort to produce audit evidence, and it's still incomplete. So 46% of the time, it's a major manual effort, and it's still incomplete. And perhaps most scary is that 16% say they cannot produce audit evidence at all for disconnected apps. And I think, this is obviously shocking, but the reason it is like we've built our compliance programs around the apps that are connected, right? We've got our sale points for our SOX compliance, our Savience, right, for doing our SOX on these disconnected on these connected apps. But when they're disconnected, it's all manual labor, all manual work, literally somebody logging in, doing verifiable work, right? And the other part of this is that 63% admitted to already failing an audit because of disconnected apps, and 36% said that they failed it more than once. 36%.
I would have thought the number would have been higher, but so from my perspective, it's the world I live in all the time. So it really comes down to the structural problem that is in the audit cycle and how they prepare for audits, how they track the data, keep the data, and how they do their day in, day out basis. And it's really, it's a great point when that you're asking, when the conversation has to shift from we failed a control to we have a structural gap. And the structural gaps are really starting to appear. They're becoming really clear, especially as we shift more from cybersecurity, in my opinion, has become about tech and tools. When you get into the business risk side of the equation with cyber risk, now we're starting to have a different structural conversation within the organization. And I think here is where that cost comes to bear, is in that data, and they got to start asking how they get better.
Well, no presentation would be complete without at least some discussion on AI. And it used to be because, people just wanted to hype it, but we're at the point now where it's, as you'll see here in the data, we are well beyond the first, maybe even second inning now with this. So what we found in the data, right? Like, again, look at that chart, right? So there's still absolute growth that's happening on the traditional SaaS app side. It's funny to call it a traditional SaaS app at this point, and it feels like it was just a new thing in the last few years, right? So there still is growth, but what we've seen with AI powered apps and specifically agents is there is that exponential growth. And what we found is that, yes, 55% of orgs said they reported a significant to extreme increase in AI apps that are bypassing IT completely. And the reason being is like pretty much every SaaS app has now built some AI enabled functionality into, whether they like it or not, it is typically opt-in by default, right? And the other thing we found is that over 50% said they have over between 51 and 100 different AI apps that can't be managed with their IDP, right? So it's got no SAML, can't do single sign-on, they can't do SCIM, which means they can't do automatic provisioning, tracking roles, entitlements, and things like that. None of these are in your identity governance program. So AI is making the disconnected surface grow faster than really any AI, any traditional manual approach can handle.
Well, I mean, Matt, you're bringing up, and the research brings up a great point. And as a phrase I used last night, and I think it fits. We're now fast approaching, or if not there, security at light speed at this point, with changes that have to be made. And your point about governance is fantastic, because what we're seeing in the research is that the policies are nowhere near where they need to be. The structural, and we see it with the work that we do, the GRC component within most organizations is not where it needs to be before they actually start to think about AI within the organization and what intellectual property might leak out of the organization as they build these systems. And then you get into the shadow AI component of it. And with the points that you made as far as the disconnected apps, it starts to get very problematic very quickly. And I'm not sure how we put the genie back in the bottle.
It's not possible.
So, but it is something that, you know, and it was a Ponemon report that we did probably about 4 months ago, breaking down the policy question of it. And it was 27% of companies surveyed, of the 1,600 companies surveyed, had an AI policy in place. My question was, did the AI write the policy, or did somebody put some thought to it?
Of course, the AI wrote it.
Yeah, of course. And then you've got the other two sections. So the middle section, you had about 30% that were thinking about an AI policy. And then you had the final group that had no intention to ever allow AI in the building. Again, I don't think there's any way around it, because almost every SaaS application that you see today, it's in there, and there, as you mentioned, there's no way to opt out.
We've talked a lot about kind of the problem, right? So there's I think really three power questions that I would give the audience to use and to think about how they can, what they can do here about this. So the first is to ask yourself a question, right? Can your identity stack see the app? Right? Again, this is not a limitation of your identity stack. For using any of the, you know, any of the big, the pings, the sale points, the octas, the entras, they support all standards. It's the app. So can your identity stack see the app? First question. Second question is, can the access be managed centrally? Or is your team having to manage access to these apps in 100 different places instead of one back in your centralized identity stack? And the last question is, can the actions be audited? This is a big one, right? You saw, remember the stats behind 16% said they had zero ability to do it. And I think it was 30-some% said that, yeah, we can do it with a massive manual effort, but, and there's still a piece that's incomplete. So these are three critical questions so that you don't automate the blind spot. Think about those. These are three critical questions. Now, I want to show you from an architecture perspective what this looks like. Because I know for me, like having a picture is always 10 times better than hearing about it. So the way we like to look at this at Cerby is you shouldn't be ripping and replacing your existing stack, right? Some organizations, you've made 6, 7, maybe 8-figure investments into your identity stack. What you want to do is you want to extend your identity stack to these disconnected applications. So for your connected stack, right, this is what it looks like today. You've got on the left-hand side, you've got your single sign-on, your Entra, your Okta, you got your joiner, mover, leaver, your governance, your sell points, your Savience. That's that existing stack on the left. You've got your agents, which should be interacting directly with that stack. It's not always the case. And then you've got your connected apps. Everything works great. The challenge is the disconnected apps that we've been talking about for the last 20 or so minutes, right? And again, the use cases of these on-prem, in the cloud, legacy, third-party SaaS apps. This is where Cerby comes in and extends your existing investments to these disconnected apps. So again, you can continue to manage all of your apps, connected, disconnected, all in one place back in your existing identity stack. And Cerby extends those capabilities to those disconnected apps, essentially obfuscating all of the messiness and the heterogeneity of those disconnected apps and presenting back to your identity stack standards and just things that can be managed centrally. Let's look at a case study. I think this could be interesting, Mike, and I love your kind of your feedback on this, right? So one of Cerby's, one of our customers is Monday.com. So Monday.com, known as the Work OS. This is a company that's been around for about 15 years. One question I get sometimes is like, hey, if a company has only been around for 10, 15 years, do they have a big disconnected app problem? And the answer is yes, right? Monday.com. This is a cloud native company. They had upwards of 200 of these disconnected apps that they could not protect. They use Okta, but they could not protect. They were spending, and kudos to them, they were able to quantify about 22,000 hours of manual lifecycle management per year. That's roughly about 1.7 million in security task costs, 1.7 million. They were able, using Cerby and working alongside with Okta, to enable almost 100% reliability, 100% automation, provisioning, deprovisioning, access across their full app stack. They saved over $500,000 a year, and they had about almost a 4x ROI in the first 9 months alone. First 9 months alone.
That's a heck of a payback at the end of the day. Absolute justification for it from the standpoint of this is what it looks like when an organization and leadership makes a decision to do something different and do it in a way that is going to help the organization from a cost saving standpoint and a productivity standpoint. I would imagine that all that manual stuff that they were trying to do, that has decreased and allowed them to redeploy personnel somewhere else.
It did. And one of the questions I often get is like, so they had this problem, what made them decide to act on this versus just continuing to manage it manually? Like yes, I mean, could an organization with as much revenue as could they have continued to do it manually? Absolutely. Right. They're not revenue constrained when it comes to that. They wanted not only to recapture the economics, but the risk, the cyber risk that's associated with not rapidly offboarding, especially around compliance frameworks like SOX that require it. They wanted to automate it. And so that's why they did that, right? And this is what the ROI typically looks like when you automate what can be such a manual process for these disconnected apps.
Matt, how long ago did they do it?
This is in the last 18 months.
That would be definitely an interesting case study in how it works over the long haul, but that decision point to actually take this step, I'd like to say it's normal, but it's unusual.
Yeah.
And so kudos to them in doing that. But yeah, it would be interesting to see what the benefit is long term over the next few years to them. But the cost savings is dramatic.
It is. It is. Well, I'll tell you what. Now, Vikram, you asked a great question around how do you measure identity maturity? And I told you we would get to this. So here's the answer to your question. We have a model that we came up with where there's basically 4 levels, right? So level 1 is what I call ad hoc, right? And this is very useful to say, hey, where is my organization today, right? So level 1 is ad hoc. This is, you've got no inventory, you've got shared credentials, you have no risk register. And we know from the data, right? 53% said they're password only and 77% have had some type of security incident. So ad hoc, right? This is the lowest level of maturity. The next level is what I call emerging. You have some visibility, you've got uneven controls. In this case here, right, maybe what we found is that from the research, 52% said they've started that discovery process of figuring out what are all my disconnected apps, where do they live? And the other 41% said, hey, we manage those credentials manually. The third level is what I call unmanaged, okay? Or managed rather. These are managed, right? So your high risk apps are identified. You're doing your joiner mover levers, it's partly automated. And your IGA integration, it's in process. And then last but not least, at the highest tier of maturity is what I would call unified. Full coverage, continuous evidence. But our data shows that only 34% of organizations are here today. So use this as a map, Vikram specifically, to figure out where your organization is. So great question there.
No, it's where we typically see clients is either one of 2 places, somewhere in between ad hoc and emerging, and the other is between emerging and managed. And those are really the areas where we see them. I talk about it all the time. I've never seen a clean assessment in 25 years of doing this. I've never seen a clean one. There's always something. There's always more work that has to be done. There's always things that have been missed. But, you know, after thousands of assessments, you would think I would find a clean one. We just have not.
Well, let's give the audience a 30, 60, 90-day plan so they can really put this into action very quickly after watching this webinar. So first 30 days, and mind you, some of these timelines, they might shift a little bit, right? If you're 500 employee organization, maybe you can do it faster than this. If you're 300,000, it's going to take you a little bit longer. First 30 days, you want to find your disconnected apps. You want to document them, rank them by risk, pick your top 10, and then add them to your risk register. That's step one, right? It's getting that situational awareness. Step two, days 31 through 60, this is where you start to measure and quantify, like, how much time is it taking us to do this manually? You know, you'd ask the question, Mike, around like Monday.com, like what made them do it? They did a really phenomenal job at quantifying like the tickets, the volume, how much are people getting paid? And they were able to say, hey, it's this massive number. That's this step two, right? It's really digging in and measuring what is this costing the business from hard economics, but then also what's it costing us from delivering audits, and what is it costing us? This is harder to quantify, but what is it costing us from a potential cyber risk perspective? So this is where you find your offboarding failure points. And then the third one is, days 60 through 90. This is where you pilot 3 to 5, maybe of your top priority disconnected apps that you find. You apply that standardized control workflow that you defined, and hopefully it's where you start your Cerby pilot, right? It's where you go in and you apply Cerby using your existing identity stack and try these things out, and then you scale from there. Don't try to boil the ocean. Start with the top 3 to 5 and then run it against those in those environments.
Matt, that inventory step to me is the most important step. You can't manage what you haven't found. If you don't have a count on it and you don't know where it is, then you're going to struggle. Every organization that we've worked with has gotten started exactly that way, by doing a count, finding out what's out there, and really clearly identifying what is within the control plane and what is outside the control plane.
All right, so we did have a couple questions come in. If you have questions, feel free to drop those in now. I want to answer those. So the first question, and this is, I'm going to go back to the other slide because this is the one they were asking about. This question here was, for an organization that's level 1 or 2 right now, what's the trap people fall into when they try to fix this? What should they actually do first? I think, I'll just echo what Mike just said, right? Probably the biggest part of this here is just understanding what is this, organizations call this different things. They call it an application rationalization, right? You've just got to know what is in your inventory. So that's the biggest step. Once you can kind of quantify this, and there's ways that you can do this, and we don't have time to talk about it today, but once you've done that, that will then help you move on to what we talked about then in this one here, right? Where you get to this second step, you're defining the operating model. You can really start to dig in and understand what's it costing the business. So start with the application inventory, and that's going to involve then speaking with some of those application owners to understand that app. That's what I would say to that. The other question that came in was about the architecture slide that I showed right here, and I'll build this out real quick. Someone said, I'm still not clear on how Cerby actually connects to an app that doesn't support SAML and SCIM. What's happening under the hood? So there's a lot that's happening under the hood. So in the Cerby platform, we've got a number of patents that are pending. So we do use machine learning and AI, but we only use it for the development of the connectors, right? So as Mike and I have talked about, right? So AI, if you ask AI a question 3 times, you get 3 different answers. So you do not want to use AI to run your AI IAM workflows. And so Cerby, we run our IAM workflows in a deterministic way. So they'll run the same way every time. But we use things like machine learning, computer vision in order to build and maintain the connectors. So that's how we're doing some of these things, right? And we look at, what does the app present? Does it present any APIs? Are there none at all? We can do all kinds of things like UI automation. Whatever it takes, we obfuscate away all of that complexity that exists in your disconnected applications, and we manage it for the life of the subscription. So it's not just building a connector one time and you're on your own. Cerby is building and maintaining in real time and extending your existing identity stack to those disconnected applications. All right, one other question. Again, if you have another question, we're almost out of time, but there is one other question. It says, this is a good question. It says, aren't most SaaS vendors moving towards SAML and skin at this point? Isn't the gap you mentioned in the beginning just going to close on its own? Ah, yes, the melting iceberg problem. This is a common misconception, right? We did research on this about a year or two ago, where we looked at all the apps in the Microsoft app catalog. And I don't remember the exact number anymore, but it's like 20,000, right? If you look at the number of apps, net new SaaS apps that are being created, most of them do support SAML at this point, but it's typically an extreme upcharge. Whereas 4 to 5x, it's called the SSO tax, if you want it. And then if you look at the other side of it, which is the provisioning and deprovisioning, the governance that's done via the SCIM standard, still only 10 to 15% of apps support the SCIM standard. So no, this problem is not going away. And again, we are seeing this with all of the, with many of the AI apps and the AI agents that are being created. They are being created not with SAML or SCIM support. So good questions, good questions. All right, I think that puts us near the end, Terry. So I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to add.
I think that's going to close us out. Appreciate the audience questions. Matt and Mike, great job. Really great deep dive on identity management here and how AI is really altering the landscape externally and internally. Thank you both for your time and your comments today.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mike.
I want to thank
Thank you. Thank you very much, Terry.
I want to thank our
Thanks,
sponsor, Cerby, as well as everyone in the audience. We appreciate your attention and participation. Sometime in the next 24 hours, you'll be receiving a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. You're welcome to share this with colleagues and peers who couldn't have been part of today's live event. This webinar is copyright 2026 by Informa TechTarget. Presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Dark Reading and Cerby. Individual speakers solely responsible for their content and opinions. On behalf of our guests, Cerby and the Dark Reading team, Terry Sweeney here. Thanks again for your time. Thanks for joining us for this session. We'll see you next time.